Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast Weekly Preview Edition. I am your host, John Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF, and once again joined by Kate, the great Magdziuk. Kate, we're heading into Week 10. How you feeling at this point in the season?
I'm feeling good. This is like do or die time. This is the most crucial time for your fantasy football rosters. We're in the middle of a bipocalypse. I don't know if you've suffered the same losses that I have this week. We've got 4 teams on bye, and it turns out that there are a lot of fantasy assets here that we're going to be without here in Week 10. So we're going to have to make some clutch decisions to help save our seasons, because I have some teams on the fringe here, and this could be a week that makes or breaks you.
Yeah, I'm with you. Kansas City, Miami, Philadelphia, and the Rams. A lot of fantasy assets in there, especially at wide receiver as well. And I think that's where I'm feeling it the most this week. It's been tough. I'm like praying that T. Higgins is available this week, because if he's not, I am already without like Jalen Waddle and AJ Brown and Puka Nacua. So it's not ideal for me in some leagues, but we'll try to get through it. Like you said, we're going to go game by game here again. We're going to hit on those key players and matchups, and I'll for sure be able to add the timestamps in the episode as well, and then include those in the episode description so people can find the games that they're looking for. Like you said, we got 4 teams on bye, 14 games to go through. We're definitely going to get into it here, but before we do, I do want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. Fall is all about the back to school and back to routine checklist, and the most important task on that list should be securing your family's financial future, starting with life insurance. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You can go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Kate, let's get her going here with our Thursday night football game. And man, the NFL schedule makers and I have some beef, because some of these island games have been brutal. But here we are with the 1-win Carolina Panthers heading to Chicago to take on the Tyson Bagent-led Bears. Kate, I think we could keep this one pretty simple considering the offenses we're discussing. So where do you want to start here?
I mean, like you said, there's not a ton of places to go with this matchup here. Like the Carolina Panthers, I think in general, you are not starting them. The only question mark I think most people have, like you're starting Adam Thielen just based on that volume, and you know, the Chicago Bears, their rush defense has actually been improved, over the course of the season here. They've been kind of a stingy matchup to opposing running backs. But you're going to need to pass, and you're going to need to pass early and often to Adam Thielen. So no question marks there. I think the biggest question mark on Carolina side of the ball, how comfortable do you feel starting Miles Sanders? Because even though the Bears are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to running backs, like this has not been an efficient matchup for running backs. And that makes me a little bit nervous, considering we're already kind of dealing with a little bit of a split situation. You don't know how much time they're really going to have to establish this run. A lot of question marks there.
I'm with you. I still probably prefer Chuba Hubbard like slightly over Miles Sanders, but Sanders did look probably the best he has all season last week. So that was something at least to kind of be hopeful for him. It is like on paper a good matchup as far as fantasy points allowed goes. Their 8th most points to the running back position, but like you said, Chicago's run defense has been fairly solid, and I don't feel like Hubbard or Sanders really are like must start options at this point in the season. Like they're probably on the fringe of that RB2, RB3 range for me at this point in the season, even with 4 teams on a bye week. it just, I don't know. You worry a little bit about the split snaps there for sure, like you said. And then Chicago's run defense has been sneakily solid so far.
Sneakily solid. Dating back to week 5, Chicago Bears allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs, holding opposing running backs to just 2.45 yards per attempt. Haven't allowed a single running back to have a rushing touchdown, again, dating back to week 5. This has been a matchup that I think, generally speaking, we've seen some improvement for, and we've seen, some more tilt towards the pass. So on the other side of the ball, the Carolina Panthers, they are not very good at stopping the run, which might be a absolute smash start for D'Onta Foreman. I've officially moved D'Onta Foreman into my top 10 running backs for the week,
Nice.
bumping out Bijan Robinson. So if Bijan goes off this week, you're welcome. But I think D'Onta Foreman is just like the biggest smash start of the week.
It's a great matchup, like you said. Giving up the second most points to running backs is Carolina. So D'Onta Foreman handled, I think, 86% of the offensive snaps last week too. Khalil Herbert might not even be activated in time for this game either, even though he is designated to return from IR. So I don't think he's going to factor in. And even if he does, I don't imagine that he's going to immediately take back that RB1 role either, right? He's probably going to be eased into action here on a short week. So I'm with you. In on D'Onta Foreman, he's going to be in starting lineups for me this week as well. So yeah, excited for that one. But other than that, on Chicago, I mean, we know DJ Moore, we feel fine about starting him. Anybody else of interest here for you?
I think you probably like, and I don't, just to be clear, I don't even feel good about starting DJ Moore. Like
Yeah.
without Justin Fields, this just hasn't been a high ceiling sort of potential, hasn't exceeded 55 receiving yards without Justin Fields this year. Like it's not necessarily, I don't think DJ Moore's a must start in this spot, though. Again, kind of with bye weeks, hard to find who else you might be willing to target. The only other guy I'm considering, Cole Kmet, who is, coming off a 2-touchdown game. It was his second multiple touchdown performance so far this season. Him and Tyson Badgett kind of seem like they got a connection. I don't know. That's probably the only guy. Like, I might actually feel better about Cole Kmet at this point than I do about DJ Moore, which kind of terrifies me to my soul.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, yeah, Cole Kmet probably in that tight end 1 range, like top 12 there, where DJ Moore, I don't think you can trust him in that range for wide receivers at this point. But yeah, I feel like there's probably not enough options ahead of him that you'd feel better about starting. So you kind of have to, suck it up and put him in the lineup, hope for the best there. Maybe he can get some nice yak yardage to add to our fantasy totals. But other than that, Carolina, Chicago, there is not a whole lot else there. So maybe we should head to our Germany game for the week. It is starting at 9:30 between the New England Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts. So for me, this, I know it's crazy. There's not a whole lot going on so far in the schedule here this week, but it feels like another pretty straightforward one, at least for the New England offense side of things. Ramondre Stevenson, probably in that maybe high end RB2 range this week. The Colts giving up the 5th most points to running backs. Demario Douglas is the lone wide receiver in New England for deeper leagues that I'm trusting. Really only deeper leagues. Same thing with Hunter Henry, deeper leagues as well. The Colts are giving up the 8th most points to tight ends. So as far as the New England offense goes, did I miss anything here?
No, unfortunately for the Patriots, you did not miss anything. I think Ramondre Stevenson, a fine start. Obviously had the long touchdown last week, but what really makes him appealing, even though he's, averaging right around 9 rush attempts per game over the last 4 weeks, it's the receiving work that you're absolutely enamored with here. A great spot for, a full PPR league. I think that's about it though. Like, you can get cute with Demario Douglas. I don't know that this is necessarily something you want to consider. Hunter Henry, also probably a fine dart throw if you're particularly desperate. We saw him get a little bit of usage, got the touchdown last week, which helped tremendously. And I think we know that, generally speaking, without Kendrick Bourne, they're going to need to continue to utilize these tight ends in the receiving game. So might be okay starting Hunter Henry, but I think he's probably the only one I'm kind of looking to. I don't want to get too cute in this matchup here, but the Colts are kind of an interesting team right now. I don't know what to make of the Indianapolis Colts. We've seen some ups and downs, from Gardner Minshew, from the rushing game. Last week, I think we saw the first kind of, I don't know, milestone in Jonathan Taylor's season. Really, like the first game we saw him really take over that entire
Mhm.
backfield. Zach Moss, just 7 rush attempts on the day. It was kind of a weird game too. The Colts had 2 pick sixes, which was insane. So they didn't need to do a whole ton on offense. Ran a season low number of offensive plays. What do we do with the Indianapolis Colts? You're firing up Michael Pittman, right? Is there anybody else besides Pittman and Jonathan Taylor that you feel good about heading into this game?
Yeah, not really, to be honest. I like Josh Downs, but he's doesn't seem like he's going to be playing this week. So he's got that knee injury that he picked up last game, or well, he was dealing with it last game and then couldn't make it through the game. So yeah, not overly interested in Alec Pierce. I just don't think he's done enough to kind of earn targets there and earn his way into our lineups, even with Josh Downs out of the way. So there's not a whole lot. Isaiah McKenzie, I don't know. We'll see if Gardner Minshew continues to kind of target the slot there. McKenzie seems to have taken over that spot at least while Downs is out, but I don't feel good enough to trust them in this matchup, even though it is a decent one for points allowed to wide receivers. So I think I'm with you. I think it's Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman, and yeah, even Zach Moss. Like we were excited about both Taylor and Moss last week, and of course that's the week that Jonathan Taylor fully takes over the backfield, right? So yeah, I'm not planning on starting Zach Moss in many leagues either. And I feel like in most league sizes now that we've seen Taylor take that roll back, probably droppable at this point, right? Unless you want to hold him for a handcuff.
Yeah, you're gonna, I think, need to count on like a rushing touchdown if you're throwing Moss into a lineup at this point. Just not a ton of fantasy points to be scored. Kind of surprised here. The over-under for this game is 43 points. So I'm not sure who exactly is going to be scoring these points. But if you asked me off the top of my head, I would have expected this game to put up maybe about 35 points. So
Yeah.
Vegas must be a little bit higher on this point total than I am, which means, I don't know, maybe there's some value here, but I think both of these offenses in general are pretty volatile, and you're not going to want to be counting on any of these guys really outside of the few that we mentioned in
Yeah.
your season long leagues.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm maybe Vegas is banking on a couple Kenny Moore pick sixes
Woo!
again. We'll see what happens there. Kenny Moore, our CB1 in IDP from rankings last week as well. So he delivered big time. All right, let's go on to another game here that's probably going to be a defensive battle as well in the AFC North. Should be a good game to watch for non-fantasy NFL watchers or for my IDP friends, but a game that we might be tempering expectations for a lot of our offensive stars in this one. Kate, where do you want to start here between the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens?
This is a brutal game for fantasy, like an absolutely brutal game. I think we can start maybe with the Baltimore Ravens, who I think have, we know what we're doing at quarterback. You're still starting Lamar Jackson. I know, played 3 quarters last week, and there was a blowout. I don't expect this to be, necessarily a blowout here. But you're starting Lamar Jackson. I think the biggest question here is what can you do with this run game? For the Baltimore Ravens, we saw Gus Edwards. He's been absolutely phenomenal. He's been scoring a ton of touchdowns. But finally, I think as we had that vote of confidence in the usage of Gus Edwards, comes out last week. He has 5 total carries in week 9. Still scored touchdowns. So fine.
Yeah.
2 of those 5 carries happen to be touchdowns. You'll take that all day. But saw some increased usage from Justice Hill towards the end of the game. Though notably did play a lot with the backup. So, take note of that. But what about this rookie running back, Keaton Mitchell? Because he was a hot waiver wire ad this week. He was probably one of the only guys you were really looking at that closely in a kind of barren waiver wire week. Is there any universe where you're starting Keaton Mitchell? Because it's a big no for me, but I know a lot
Yeah.
of people have these questions, especially after, maybe unloading some fab to get the rookie who just had, I think, a 90% missed forced tackle rate last week. It was insane.
He was awesome last week, and I think a lot of people are excited to have kind of acquired him off waiver wire, so they might be anxious to put him into lineups. I'm with you. I don't think this is the week to do it. I think considering the bodies they have in that backfield with Gus Edwards, Justice Hill working in there, even though Gus Edwards had only, like you said, 5 carries last week, it was also kind of a weird game where they blew out the Seahawks, I guess it was, and didn't play in the fourth quarter there. So I think this is kind of a wait and see situation with Keaton Mitchell, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill. If you can afford to sit all 3 of these guys, I think you kind of have to in this matchup against the Browns. Browns giving up the 29th most points to running backs. Very stingy defense. They're good all around there. So I am not banking on either of these running backs to be in my lineups this week if I can afford to. Gus Edwards probably the one that I would put ahead of them. The other 2, Keaton Mitchell and Justice Hill, just because of the potential there near the goal line. But that's about it. I don't feel great about starting any of the Ravens running backs.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from a matchup perspective, you're 100% right. So but in general, if you're confident in a running back's workload, then, sometimes you can kind of get over those tough matchups, right? But this is a situation where I think last week prompted a lot of questions regarding the usage moving forward. I do agree. I'm leaning Gus Edwards if you have to pick one because of that goal line usage, but also because they pulled him out of the game with the starters last week. So I'm kind of wondering if it was one of these circumstances where it was like, okay, you're getting the lead, you're getting up, let's, get the rookie some run, let's get Justice Hill some work, and it still feels like he's RB1 in this offense, but it's going to be a risky bet regardless as they're going up against Cleveland Browns. How about on the other side of the ball, who their defensive matchup, not any easier for any of these assets. You've got Amari Cooper, who's been just playing phenomenal football this season, has been a solid asset for fantasy, had some upside here, but against the Baltimore Ravens, second time they faced each other this season, was extremely unproductive in their first meeting. Can you trust Amari Cooper against this Baltimore Ravens defense, which this has been a lockdown unit, and I don't know how anybody is going to be able to move the ball on this team, especially for a offense that I think has generally lacked that kind of explosive element. Even with Deshaun Watson returning, it just doesn't feel ideal for me.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I would imagine that Amari Cooper probably, if you, again, another one, if you could afford to, again, bye weeks that might have people in a tougher spot here, but outside the top 24 for me, if I had to rank him, again, that last game against the Ravens was not good for Amari Cooper. It wasn't good for Deshaun Watson either. And Deshaun Watson really just hasn't been good this year. So it's hard to trust him. Ravens have obviously deployed a lot of man coverage as well at a top 10 rate. They've been very, very good at that. And Amari Cooper, he has at least found more success against man coverage. So that's kind of the one hope. He does have an 84.8 receiving grade against man, which is 9th best among wide receivers. I don't love the overall matchup for this Browns offense. So that makes it harder for me to kind of trust Amari Cooper because I don't trust a Deshaun Watson to get it done against Baltimore.
Yeah, this is, I think, just a defense that's going to force a lot of mistakes. Both of these defenses, honestly, I think could make things ugly for the other. Not really excited about starting any of these assets. Jerome Ford, again, could be one of these volume-based plays, but these are not, if I can avoid starting any asset on either of these teams at this point, I'm 100% doing this because this is going to be a very tough defensive battle here in the AFC North. And I mean, these are literally 2 of the league's best defenses here going toe to toe. Things could get ugly here in Baltimore.
Yeah, I'm with you. Even on the other side, like you said, Zay Flowers is somebody that I'm avoiding this week as well, and wrote him up in the wide receiver man zone coverage report that people can check out as well, and see why we're tempering expectations there. But I'm with you. It's just it's a tough matchup all around. So let's move on to one that's potentially a little bit more fun here. The Houston Texans going up against the heating up Cincinnati Bengals. Excited about this one, but Joe Burrow is looking healthy again, back to being Joe Burrow again. But Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both dealing with injuries. Jamar Chase dealing with that back injury. T. Higgins dealing with a hamstring injury. It does not look like T. Higgins is going to practice today, but Jamar Chase could be out there probably in a limited fashion. So this is very concerning, at least for the Bengals offense. But yeah, especially going against a Houston team that is very good against wide receivers as far as fantasy points allowed goes. They're 30th in most points to wide receivers. So that makes it a little bit harder for guys if they're banged up, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So how do you feel about if T. Higgins is able to go limited with this hamstring injury now? How comfortable do you feel starting him in lineups?
Not feeling great. Like you mentioned, this has already been a really tough defensive matchup for fantasy wide receivers. The Texans are ranked eighth so far this season in terms of PFF coverage grade. Might get Derek Stingley back, I think, from IR this week. So like they're just going to get another body in the mix here. The Texans have just been a really solid coverage unit, and you know, despite the fact that Joe Burrow is getting healthy, if you have one of these two wide receivers limited, or both potentially, or maybe not even have them at all, that's definitely going to, I think, lower the ceiling. Joe Burrow, he's probably still going to get it done. Like he finds ways to get it done when he
Yeah.
is fully healthy, and he looks to be at this point. So I think you still start Joe Burrow, but I think all in all, you've really got to temper expectations. You start Jamar Chase. I don't feel as strongly about T. Higgins if you absolutely like it. If you have any other options, I'd probably prefer to sit T. Higgins out of either of them. Like last week, Jamar Chase's back injury. I'm praying for the sake of my fantasy teams that this is like one of those moments where you go down, you take a really hard hit. He fell like really awkwardly on his
Oh yeah.
back. You could tell immediately just how painful it looked. Hoping one of these things that like as the days go on, he's getting a little looser, a little less sore. We've all taken some hits. We've all I haven't played contact football, but I have grown up in the icy winters of Ohio. And guess what? I've fallen on my back quite a few times, sliding down some icy steps.
Yep.
And yeah, you can feel pretty sore for a couple of days after that, but hopefully you shake it off. I, you start Jamar Chase. I don't know, for a wide receiver that's been as volatile as T. Higgins with a new hamstring injury, like, I don't want
I
it.
yeah, I think I'm with you. I am definitely concerned about T. Higgins. Like I pretty much have to start him where I have him, but I'm not excited about putting him in the lineup. The Texans, again, another one from the Man Zone Coverage Report article. They've run a zone coverage at a top 10 rate this year. They've allowed a first down or touchdown on just 31.8% of plays, which zone plays. So that's the eighth best mark in the league. And surprisingly, T. Higgins has struggled more against zone coverage this year, averaging just 0.24 fantasy points per route run, which is tied for 88th among qualifying wide receivers, to go along with a 60.2 receiving grade against zone coverage, which is 73rd among wide receivers. So not an easy matchup for T. Higgins either. So I do feel like we could see his potential production limited this week, coming off his best week of the year too, which is a bummer to see. So I'm hoping that I'm wrong on that one, because I'm sure a lot of people are having to start T. Higgins if he's active, but not overly excited about this matchup at all.
No, no, this is going to be, man, this is going to be a tough week.
Mhm.
Honestly, I can see this being probably one of the lowest scoring weeks for fantasy that we're going to have all
Yeah.
season. Of course, that isn't necessarily a surprise considering we have the two top scoring offenses in the league out on bye. But this might be one of these like really low ceiling weeks for fantasy, which, it might mean you guys have some very tight matchups on the horizon, and it might come down to decimals in a week like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely could be. So hopefully we're able to help you make some lineup decisions here. And again, reference the rankings on the website as well. And Kate, you have your rankings too. So definitely utilize those this week more than anything. But on the Texans side of things, I feel pretty good about this offense for the most part, outside of the backfield, obviously. But Nico Collins, Tank Dell, I feel like I could start them pretty comfortably. The Bengals 54.0 team coverage grade. They've also run an above average rate of man coverage. Both Nico Collins and Tank Dell have delivered top 10 marks in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. So they've been really good, especially against man coverage. So I feel pretty good about starting them. CJ Stroud, I feel pretty good about starting just for the volume. He's been amazing. So how about you? Am I excited about everybody on this Houston offense except for the backfield? Am I reading that right?
Yes,
Okay.
100%. Really love Dalton Schultz at this point
Yes.
in the season. I was so high on him coming into the year. He started off slow, but boy, has he heated up over the last few weeks. So you smash start Dalton Schultz, like this kind of whole pass attack is a go for me, which
Yeah.
I never would have expected that I was going to say
Yeah, it's
if
been
you asked me back in week one.
Yeah, it's been a really nice surprise this year, and a lot of that has to do with the volume of passing that they're doing, and CJ Stroud delivering too, right? Just the one interception, I think, still on the year, so he's been really good. And yeah, Dalton Schultz, Bengals given up the second most points to tight ends as well, so Dalton Schultz is definitely in that top 5 range for me this week as well. So yeah, that'll do it for Houston Cincinnati. Let's keep it going here, and quick ad break first from our friends at Prize Picks. This podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, PFF's prize pick lineup this week. Kate, I got to go through it and pick my own this week. Let me know if you feel good about this. So Adam Thielen over 68.5 receiving yards, and Deontay Foreman, I think you'll like this one, over 62.5 rushing yards. How are we feeling about those two picks for our Thursday night game?
Smash and smash.
Beautiful.
You really picked out two of like probably the only assets we could smash the over on, which is my favorite thing to do on Prize Picks. I love the more thans. That's the way to root for a game. I want action, and I think it's going to come through these two players for their respective teams.
Yeah, for sure. I always like to get a little dangerous with some unders every once in a while and really sweat them out if I want to feel alive. But the best way to do it is definitely to bet those overs. So we're gonna go with those two, Adam Thielen and Deontay Foreman, on Thursday night, hitting their overs on Prize Picks. And then with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. So, for example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3 points made plus receptions. Obviously, you're not going to use that this week, Travis Kelce on a bye week, but that's just an example of what you can do. So go to prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy and use code PFF fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy and use code PFF fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, moving now to a couple of well-rested teams coming off bye weeks. Should be another fun matchup with the current struggling 49ers. 3 straight losses now going up against the Jaguars, winners of 5 straight. So where do you want to start with this matchup here, San Francisco and Jacksonville?
Let's just knock out San Francisco. I feel like this is a pretty like self-explanatory offense, right? Like, I don't know. What do you think? Are we starting Christian McCaffrey this week? Like, I don't know. Might be a good spot start. No, you're starting Christian McCaffrey. You're starting, Brandon Ayuk. You're starting George Kittle. Like, there's, this offense. The biggest question is, what do you do with Brock Purdy? Because, prior to this 3-game losing streak where he's thrown 5 interceptions over the last 3 games, was really productive for fantasy because of the fact that he wasn't turning over the ball. We've seen him get a little bit more involved as a rusher than we've seen, it dating back to last season. Can you go back to the well? Because this has generally been a decent coverage unit so far for the Jaguars this year, but probably a generally underrated coverage unit. We have him as the third most highly graded coverage unit
Mhm.
this year, only behind the Jets and the Ravens per PFF coverage grade.
Yeah, they've done a really nice job over there in Jacksonville, and yeah, Brock Purdy will be the interesting one for me as well. So they surprisingly, Jacksonville still giving up the 10th most points to quarterbacks. So I feel like Brock Purdy probably gets inside that top 12 range for me this week, but like really close on the fringe kind of thing. I feel like I can start him depending on who my other options are, just because of the weapons that he has there, right? Like you said, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and it seems like Deebo Samuel's going to be back this week as well, right? So there's just so many guys that can help elevate him now in that offense, even in a tougher matchup. So I feel pretty okay about Brock Purdy this week, despite the struggles, but definitely not always feeling that way with him. It's kind of on a week to week basis with me and Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I have him as like a fringe QB1.
Mm-hmm.
He feels like he could go either way at this point, to be
Yeah.
honest. Hopefully he's healthy. He was dealing with a concussion and then kind of came back rather quickly from that. So hopefully fully healthy coming out of the bye and well rested and, you know, uh, taking some time for their genius play caller to, diagnose this offense and figure out what's been going wrong. On the other side of the ball, we have another quarterback who's actually been, I don't know, low key one of the most disappointing quarterbacks for fantasy in all of fantasy. I don't
Yeah.
like Trevor Lawrence has been massively disappointing this year. Still, like, just he isn't producing, despite the fact that this has been, a relatively high scoring offense. So much of that has funneled through Travis Etienne in the run game. It doesn't seem to make sense because Trevor Lawrence has some of the best offensive weapons and best receiving weapons in the entire NFL, but it hasn't translated to fantasy production from him. And now going up against the 49ers, who the defense has been more suspect as of late,
Mm-hmm.
but they just added Chase Young into the mix, presuming he's going to make his debut alongside Nick
Mm-hmm.
Bosa. You've got, Fred Warner at linebacker. Like, this is probably going to be a nightmare of a matchup for Trevor Lawrence, who's already struggled to produce for fantasy this year. Can you start him?
So I included Trevor Lawrence in my O-line D-line matchup articles that's coming out Friday morning, and I'm not starting him. I'm avoiding him this week, and it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I talked about Brock Purdy having the offensive weapons there, which helps him. Trevor Lawrence has them as well, but Trevor Lawrence, like you said, has been really disappointing, just isolated as a quarterback here. He owns a 5.9% turnover worthy play rate when pressured this year, which ranks as the ninth worst mark in the league. He's thrown 3 interceptions when pressured as well, tied for 7th most. He's got an adjusted completion rate when pressured of just 58.8%, which ranks 28th among 36 qualifying quarterbacks. And like you said, he's going up against a defensive line here that is absolutely going to be able to bring pressure between Nick Bosa, Chase Young, now Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead. Like, there are some stars on that defensive line,
It's
and
ridiculous. It's not fair.
it's really not. I cannot believe they were able to swing that trade Chase Young for a 3rd round pick, which is unreal. So it's a really good defense, even though they like you said, they've been suspect as of late, but there are stars there where it's hard to bet against these guys. And I think Trevor Lawrence could potentially struggle this week against San Francisco.
Still hasn't finished better than QB 10 so far this season. Not a single time, which is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
insane. Like, even Baker Mayfield, he's had a QB 7, QB 8 finish. Like, we're seeing some very unproductive quarterbacks for fantasy. Mac Jones, even QB 2 in week 1. Like, we're seeing even the most unproductive quarterbacks being able to post higher upside performances than
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence, which is insane. But yeah, I think, within the realm of outcomes, I'm probably going to project him right around where he's been scoring, which is right around like QB 15, 16. And I just don't love the matchup. But what about his pass catchers? So based
Yeah.
on the matchup, I'm leaning toward Christian Kirk as my higher upside option here, working out of the slot. But anything from your man zone coverage report that we should be pulling out of nuggets here, because obviously Calvin Ridley been a super volatile asset. Is this a matchup that we can trust him in?
So yeah, I'm a little bit worried about Calvin Ridley. And yeah, I was going to ask you which one do you feel better about, Christian Kirk or Calvin Ridley, and you answered it there. And I'm with you. I think it is Christian Kirk. I feel like he could be the Jaguars' best fantasy wide receiver this week again, as he leads the team in fantasy points per route run versus zone. The Jaguars, I think, have run the fourth most zone coverage snaps in the NFL. So Christian Kirk leading the way there, 0.43 fantasy points per route run against zone, which is 22nd. The rest of the Jacksonville wide receivers rank outside the top 50 in that regard versus zone coverage. So they all rank out, and it's a tougher matchup too, like we've been saying about the 49ers have been much better in zone coverage this year, allowing a league best I don't know what I've written here, 6.7 yards per reception, which is the best mark in the league, basically to say that. So when I can read my own writing, they also have allowed a first down or touchdown on just 27.6% of zone coverage snaps, which is the third best mark among defenses as well. So they play about average in man and zone, but definitely more zone than man. So that has me worried a little bit for the rest of the Jaguars wide receivers outside of Christian Kirk. And Calvin Ridley just hasn't performed up to snuff this year. So I am a little bit concerned about him, but prefer Christian Kirk if I have to pick one.
Yeah, I think Evan Ingram also a fine start. Again, not sure how many, tight ends you really can viably start over him at this point. He's been playing pretty well. And obviously you're down a few starting tight ends given this matchup. Or given the week, the bipocalypse. So like you're starting Evan Ingram, but I think Kirk and Ingram probably have a better chance to exploit this matchup a little bit more so than Christian Kirk, who feels a little bit more boomer bust this week.
Yeah. Yeah, I am 100% with you there. All right, let's go on to a couple of 5 and 4 teams here. The New Orleans Saints versus the Minnesota Vikings, who are led by the Pastronaut, Josh Dobbs. And for this one, I think I want to start with the Minnesota running back situation, because last week I was out here motivating Alexander Mattison, giving him some bulletin board material, and he had one of the best games of the season because, of course, he did. So for fantasy managers that had to start Alexander Mattison, you're welcome. And I think I'll try to do you another favor again for those who are forced to start him, because I once again do not like him this week going against the New Orleans Saints, who have allowed the 28th most points to running backs. Looking at the offensive line, defensive line matchup for this one, the Vikings offensive line has generated just one rushing yard before contact, which ranks 27th. The Saints defensive line has earned the third best run defensive grade. The Saints have also allowed just 1.1 yards before contact per rush attempt, seventh best mark. And then you look at Alexander Mattison, who has a first down or touchdown rate of just 2.3% when contacted 2 or fewer yards from the line of scrimmage, which is by far the worst mark among qualifying running backs. And then, coming off his best game of the season too, I don't think we want to get too caught up in that with him, where you can afford to, avoid him. Basically, his struggles really have been evident all year long. I'm not trusting him just because he had this one great matchup. I want to see it more from him. Averaging 1.7 yards per carry when contacted 2 or fewer yards from the line of scrimmage as well. That ranks 53rd among running backs, 53rd among 53 qualifying running backs. So dead last again there in that range. So I just don't have much confidence in Alexander Mattison. So if he does go off this week, you're welcome, everybody, for being forced to start him. But if you can afford to sit him, I'm definitely sitting him.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting spot because, with an actual week where, I don't know, Josh Dobbs learns the names of the players that he's throwing to, and maybe he learns a little bit of that playbook. Like, what can we expect from the Minnesota Vikings? I'm not totally sure. This feels like a very wide range of potential outcomes. Doesn't seem like we're going to get Justin Jefferson back this week, though the practice window was activated for him. I just kind of want to avoid most of these assets because the New Orleans Saints, they've of course been stout to running backs, but this has just been kind of a tough defense to exploit for any fantasy
Mhm.
assets at this point in the season. This has just been a really stout defense all around. Lots of playmakers, not necessarily easy to run on, but it hasn't translated to production so much in the passing game either. So, I think if you need somebody that's, going to probably see 20 plus touches, you might have to start Alexander Madison, but you don't love it.
Yeah.
You definitely don't love it. But, Jordan Addison, temperature check with Josh Dobbs and it, mm,
Yeah, I feel not like terrible about Jordan Addison just because he is still the wide receiver one there with Justin Jefferson out. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson I would prefer in this case, but the Saints coverage unit has been just so good this season all around. And again, deploying a lot of man coverage. They've been among the best in the league when it comes to the coverage metrics. They're in man. So Jordan Addison has been fine against man coverage. I think 21st among fantasy wide receivers in fantasy points per route run. So it's not a great target rate for him. He's delivered with some touchdowns, so that's kind of helped boost him a little bit. So he's probably more in that kind of wide receiver 3 range for me this week, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think that's totally right. Keep an eye on TJ Hawkinson, who unfortunately dealing with like a rib or
Mm,
oblique, like some sort of abdomen type area injury. It did get a limited practice on Wednesday, which is good. But just keep an eye on his status. Obviously, if he plays, you start him, and not many questions there. But how about the New Orleans Saints, who, we finally saw Chris Olave put up a solid fantasy week,
yeah.
had the touchdown, which was fantastic, and you love to see that. Chris Olave, he's just gotten so many opportunities this season, but they just haven't quite connected on the same page with Derek Carr. And you finally saw, kind of that bounce back performance. Started the season so hot and then just kind of fell off. But are you trusting this, finally scoring a touchdown? Like, can you just light Chris Olave up with full total confidence on a week to week basis? Or are you still like, are
Yeah,
you wary?
yeah, wary, I think is fine. Yeah, full total confidence is definitely strong when it comes to Chris Olave, but I feel like he's going to be in starting lineups across the board here for
Yeah.
most fantasy managers, right? So feel okay about him. And looking at it, Minnesota's allowed the ninth most points to wide receivers, so that's a decent sign at least here. It's just a matter of what Derek Carr can do because, like you said, he's been hotter lately with those 300 plus games, and then a
Been a little
strong game
healthier.
last. Yeah. So that's definitely helped the case here. So I feel pretty good about Chris Olave, and then like super deep leagues, I feel fine about maybe taking a shot here on Rashid Shaheed. Would be the one, like really really deep leagues though. Because again, you're banking on that one big play to kind of put him over the top. But yeah, that is like, and then Taysom Hill too. Sorry, Taysom Hill is probably the other asset here, right? So we talked a lot about Taysom Hill on the waiver wire show, and I think in the recap show as well. I can't remember. I talked too much during the week, I think, but Taysom Hill is somebody that should definitely be, I think, started at this point, right? I mean, just given his usage and how effective he's been when he gets those touches. I mean, he ran the ball, I think, 11 times for 52 yards and caught 4 passes for 13 yards and a touchdown last week, which was pretty impressive. And the guy, they're just utilizing him everywhere. I think I called him the NFL's equivalent of a hot dog because he has basically all the alignments that he's lining up everywhere: quarterback, running back, tight end, in the slot, just doing a little bit of everything, all combined into one delicious treat there in Taysom Hill. So that is that was kind of my feelings on Taysom Hill. But how about you? Are you feel comfortable about starting Taysom Hill in your lineups this week?
I feel super comfortable with the comparison of Taysom Hill to a hot dog. I really think that's just totally on point here. I mean, you can't argue with the opportunities. Getting over the last 4 games, 11 and a half opportunities a game in that span, scored a touchdown per game. Like this, the averages have been insane. He's been a top 8 tight end each of the last 4 weeks. Like the opportunities are there, so I think you start him. Like if I told you any given tight end would have 11 opportunities a week, that's a must start tight end,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, forget the name, forget the fact that he's Taysom Hill, forget the fact that he's a hot dog. It, he like he's getting more opportunities than most of the league's starting tight ends. So I think you continue rolling there with Taysom Hill as long as he's continuing to get those opportunities, which he is.
Yeah, yeah, they haven't seemed to go away from him, whether all the running backs are healthy or not. So it's been a good sign, I think, that he'll continue to be involved in the offense. So that's definitely a positive there for Taysom Hill. But anything else in this game, New Orleans, Minnesota, to go over, or should we move on?
Let's move on. Keep it
Let's
rolling.
All right, let's do it. And it is Steelers time, Kate, coming
Mhm.
off a Thursday night win. So I'm very glad that your Steelers got a W on prime time. For your sake, I'll let you kick us off here. Coming off the high of the win, facing the now 3-5 Green Bay Packers. Where do you want to start with this game?
This is an interesting game. I Can we start with the Packers? I feel like that would be
Sure.
probably quicker, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Aaron Jones finally had his big breakout game. Like, we had that sort of hint, right? That, like, okay, so he didn't get a ton of touches in his second game returning from this injury, but then kind of like the snap count was up, and you thought maybe this is going to be like the turning point for Aaron Jones, and it turns out that's exactly what we got in week 10. It was great. Or sorry, week
Mhm.
9. So I think you just move full steam ahead. Coming off 20 rushing attempts, it wasn't efficient. But this matchup against the Steelers, of course, you have Cam Hayward back in the mix, which helps the run game a bit, but still been a fine matchup, I think, for opposing running backs. He's involved enough as a receiver that I'm fine starting Aaron Jones here. There's not a lot else that I like about this matchup, though, for the Green Bay Packers.
There's really not, right? Like, even though the Steelers are giving up the fifth most points to wide receivers this year, it's kind of hard to trust these wide receivers in Green Bay, right? It's Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed. Christian Watson, you would think, would be the one, but he has not delivered at all this year and has been super frustrating for fantasy purposes, even when he's in the lineup. So doesn't feel like he's fully healthy either. I was coming out of that last game. He had neck, back, concussion. I don't know what was going on with him. There was all kinds of stuff that
That
he
was the weirdest, I think, tweet
what
that
the
I've
hell
ever
was
seen. I
that?
was like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, what? What kind of injury does he have? Because he had all of them. It was
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, he was on the injury report with yes. That basically last week. I don't know what was the deal there. So we'll see if he's more involved this week or not. But I'm not trusting him in lineups until I see it at this point. I felt good about him in previous weeks where I'd plug him in even though he hadn't shown it, and then he did not deliver. So it's at this point you got to show it to me first before I put you in a lineup. And Christian Watson is definitely not getting in my lineup this week.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, and then nothing else really on Green Bay. I mean, Luke Musgrave did deliver his first touchdown of the year. We got to
Hey,
shout out that. So that was awesome to see. But let's go to the Steelers side of things here, Kate. And Jaylen Warren, kind of interesting. He received double-digit carries this past week for the first time all year. I think he ran for 11 times for 88 rushing yards, which was a really strong number for him. He's been a little bit more efficient. He's graded a little bit better than Najee Harris this season. I still feel better about starting Najee Harris than I do Jaylen Warren. Najee got us a touchdown last week, so that was nice to see. So where are you at with this backfield heading into week 10 now? We keep doing updates here, but how,
I'm
yeah.
I'm still tepid at best. Like, I'm not looking to target like this split is just too darn close for me.
Yeah.
The Green Bay Packers, they've been like a fine fantasy matchup, allowing the 11th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So, like, not necessarily like the scariest matchup in the world, but it's still really hard to put a lot of stock in this run game when like the usage has been really unsteady. And this has been an offense whose production in general has been super volatile. Like, you don't know um, really what you're going to get in any given week. And that makes me a little bit nervous over the last 4 games in particular too. We've seen the Green Bay Packers just get a little bit stronger against the run.
Mhm.
I'm not looking to start either of these running backs. Am I just a crazy Steelers fan who's frustrated with my team, or I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like Najee, I mean, I'm starting him over Alexander Madison again. Although I think it was close last week, obviously, but yeah, I'd probably put him in there in kind of that low end, like RB2 range, for me, just for the potential. But like you said, the Steelers offense has been a little untrustworthy, and this isn't a great matchup either. Like Green Bay, as far as like passing defense goes, have been pretty solid, right? So if they can't pass the ball, they might not get into scoring range where you can, Najee Harris can fall into the end zone kind of thing. So that part of it does worry me a little bit. But yeah, I think I probably, like, in most cases I'm starting Najee Harris, but again, where you can afford it, you could also be looking to sit him this week, because like you said, that split is pretty close going into this week. So we'll see what happens here. But as far as the passing offense goes, I'm still feeling good about Deontay Johnson ahead of George Pickens heading into this week. Deontay Johnson just been more efficient and obviously getting the targets there. So how about you? What's your read on the Steelers wide receivers this week?
Still rolling with Deontay Johnson. I mean, he's been just like a steady force in the receiving game. At least 6 targets in each of his games, even though he's kind of been like doing the Deontay Johnson thing where he hops on and off the field at times, but finally broke that touchdownless streak. He's just been kind of a volume hog. And that's really all you kind of want to see out of Deontay Johnson. I feel like we're so not expecting touchdowns at this point that just felt like a really nice bonus last week. And I think this is a fine enough matchup for the Steelers, but definitely trusting that volume for Deontay Johnson a bit more. The only question is, do we see the squeaky wheel game from George Pickens, who the narrative all week long has been that he is just so frustrated. He denies it. But like there's just been all these little sort of whisperings that George Pickens might be frustrated with his role. Any thoughts that they might look to get him more involved, coming off a -1 receiving yard output in week 9?
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, I think there's always potential for the squeaky wheel game, so I always like those. I just don't know that I love the matchup, and then also combined with what George Pickens has done so far this season. Like, again, we can reference the zone coverage report here, but Packers have been a top 10 team in zone coverage rate this season, and they're among the top 10 teams at limiting receiving yards. They're allowing just a 10.7 explosive play rate, 6.8 yards per coverage, target, 9.4 yards per reception, all in zone coverage, which are all among the top 10 in the NFL. So they're really good there. And George Pickens, 65th among wide receivers in fantasy points per route run against zone coverage this year. So he's really kind of struggled against zone for whatever reason. But yeah, I guess, like, again, maybe like a wide receiver 3 range for me, George Pickens, just for the potential for, I think that, like you said, squeaky wheel game, but I just don't feel good about it. I don't think he's had his flashes, obviously, like he always does, but hasn't delivered the way that I thought he could deliver here in year 2. So maybe a bit of a sophomore slump as well. But yeah, I'd much rather play Deontay Johnson if given the choice, for sure.
Yeah, just a kind of a volatile asset. And I think that's
Mhm.
kind of what he projects as, right? Like, we know he's a big play contested catch guy. You can go deep to George Pickens. He's one of those guys you can just throw the ball up in the air and let him try for these 50-50 balls. But that play style, very hard to count on every single down for him to make those types of plays. Deontay Johnson's just the more stable force in this offense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we'll hope that the floodgates are open for touchdowns now for Deontay Johnson as well.
Yes.
We could only hope. So let's go on to a battle of 3 and 4 teams here. It's the Titans and the Bucks, and I think I want to start with decently high expectations for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers, at least for me, this week. So Again, this was another one that I referenced in the man zone coverage report because it stood out as far as the matchup goes. But the Titans have played a league average rate of both man and zone coverage. And then Tennessee's allowed 10.2 yards per coverage target and a 20.5 explosive play rate in man, which are both among the 5 worst figures in the league. The Titans are also below average in defensive success rate while in zone and yards allowed per coverage target. So Mike Evans, I feel like should be in for a fantastic game, ranked 6th in fantasy points per route run against man, tied for 12th in that regard against zone. Not telling anybody that anything that they don't know that you're starting Mike Evans, but really, really like him this week. And then Chris Godwin as well, who's been significantly more effective against man coverage this year, tied for 17th in fantasy points per route run compared to 72nd against zone. So getting a team that still runs a decent amount of man should help him as well. So like Chris Godwin in that kind of wide receiver 2 range for me this week as well.
Yeah, I think both of these guys are good plays. Rachaad White, even like it again, you
Yeah.
don't count on him maybe for the most efficient rushing abilities, right? But really hard to deny Rachaad White as well, just for some of that receiving upside. It's a fine matchup. The only thing I'm kind of staying away from right now is Cade Otton, who's
Yeah.
coming off his first multiple touchdown game of his career. How are you feeling about Cade Otton against this Tennessee Titans defense, which been pretty stingy to fantasy tight ends so far this season? Even, Mark Andrews, who, he's Mark Andrews, 69 receiving yards. Like that's the best you've seen by far, by a mile against this Tennessee Titans defense this year. Any confidence there that you can go back to the well with Cade Otton for anybody that maybe just picked him up over the past week on waivers?
Yeah, not this week. This week I just
Try
don't
again
feel great.
later.
Yeah. Yeah. And then look, he is getting the snaps. We talked about him on the waiver wire show as well. He's got really, really great usage. The snaps are all there for him, but it's not a great matchup. And it's hard to trust a guy like Cade Otton, who's not like a bona fide star at tight end either, right? And you just don't know what to expect from him on any given week. And you kind of have to play the matchups in that case. So I'm avoiding Cade Otton this week. And yeah, more looking at Godwin, Evans, Rachaad White as well, who's been an RB1 3 weeks in a row. Shout out to him in PPR. So those are really the 3 main assets for me. I don't even really love Baker Mayfield this week against Tennessee. Against Tennessee. But yeah, let's focus on Tennessee here. So where can we start here? I mean, Will Levis is in a decent matchup, right? But he didn't do it against Pittsburgh after that 4 touchdown game. How about this week? Do you feel good about Will Levis against the Buccaneers?
I feel great about this matchup. This is one of my favorite
Nice.
streaming matchups of the entire week. I love, love, love the spot that Will Levis is in. So like since the bye week, since coming out of the bye, I mean, this has been a just delicious matchup for opposing quarterbacks. The Bucs secondary, banged up, allowing the a league high almost 1,400 passing yards since week 6, 118.4 passer rating, 19.9% explosive pass percentage. All of those metrics lead the league in what they're giving up to opposing quarterbacks. Have allowed a 9-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio in that span. Like this has been just a free for all. And Will Levis, I know we had a down week against the Steelers, but that's kind of what the Steelers do. They're a very bend don't break kind of defense. That hasn't allowed a ton of touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks. So like you probably expected as much in this game. So I love Will Levis. As an extension of that, I love DeAndre Hopkins. I'm even okay taking a flyer on, like a Kyle Phillips, who's played out of the slot, got a few targets last week against the Steelers, and we have Treylon Burks, who's I'm presuming out in the concussion protocol. They might need to get, some other receivers besides DeAndre Hopkins involved. Like I think this is one of those matchups that I'm going to be targeting, for any of my dire situations for my teams. Like these are all my YOLO plays of the week.
Nice. I like it for sure. Yeah, can't argue with you there. Let's go on here and do one more quick ad break before we wrap up the rest of the games here. And this is from our friends at Manscaped. It's not a bird, it's not a plane, it's the most revolutionary ball trimmer the world has ever seen. Gentlemen, our friends at Manscaped have been working night and day to bring you the below the waist grooming experience like none other with their brand new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. We're talking about a next generation trimmer with interchangeable blade heads for whatever shave your mind can imagine. AI is cool, but I think this might be the biggest technological advancement the world has ever seen. Upgrade your grooming game to the Ultrasphere this year by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with code PFF, high tech for low places. Manscaped. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. I can promise you've never seen a ball trimmer look like a spaceship. Get yours today from our folks at Manscaped. All right, Kate, let's go on to our next game on the slate here, and it is Atlanta and Arizona in a battle of the NFL team alphabetical leaders. But there is probably a fair bit more to talk about here between more Arthur Smith shenanigans and Kyler Murray's return. So where would you like to start with this game?
Let's start with the ridiculousness that is Arthur Smith, because I think we all need therapy at this point in the season for just the usage. I mean, you're looking at, Bijan Robinson, who is this generational talent, averaging more yards after contact per carry than Tyler Algier is overall per carry, not even after contact. Like he's been so far and away the more efficient running back. They will do anything to avoid giving Bijan Robinson the ball in the red zone. It's so infuriating.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that there's going to be a point where Arthur Smith says, okay, maybe I'm not outsmarting the league by not using my best player. Am
You
I
would think so.
expecting
You
too
would think
much
so.
from that?
I think you might be expecting too much because we all saw that clip that was circulating yesterday. I guess it was the 5 minutes of him
5 minutes of nonsense.
what the hell was that? That was like the scene in Billy Madison where the guy's like, everything you just said, it made everyone in this room dumber and may God have mercy on your soul. Like that, that's how I felt after watching that clip of Arthur Smith explaining why Bijan Robinson didn't get more carries in the red zone. Like that was insane. I don't understand it at all. It makes zero sense.
He talked himself into circles for 5 straight minutes and then didn't answer the question.
Yeah.
You know why? Because there is no rational answer for why you're not getting him involved. There is no reason to give Jonnu Smith, Kaderl Hodge, like who? No, do not give them carries in the red zone above Bijan Robinson. And I mean, again, there's really no rationale that can explain it. Like he had no reasons that he could offer. He just kind of talked himself in circles here. But, they've been cute, right? It's not working out. They're in they've lost 2 games in a row. They lost to Will Levis in his first career start, allowing 4 touchdowns, and they couldn't keep up with the rookie. And then you lose to Josh Dobbs, who didn't even know the playbook. You had Kevin O'Connell literally translating plays on the sideline because he didn't know the playbook because he just got to town. This is, I think, one of these moments where Arthur Smith's going to have to look himself in the eye. And, in that beautiful mirror that he used to trim his mustache off and just say like, okay, I'm not outsmarting anybody. I need to get my best players the ball. Is this the week it happens though?
Yeah, I would really hope that he has the self-awareness to do that. And so far, he hasn't really shown to be capable of that. So it's hard. I mean, I feel like Bijan Robinson, you play him probably more as an RB2 this week more than anything. It's so hard to kind of have to put a guy in your lineup that is not going to get ideal touches and efficiency, but we know he's so dynamic with the ball in his hand that you kind of hope that he's able to break through and overcome the circumstances by just through overall talent, right? And I think that's why we start Bijan Robinson and against Arizona. It's a great matchup to do it too, like the 3rd most points to running back. So I'm putting Bijan Robinson in. I'm hoping for the best. I'm with you. I think we got to hope that Arthur Smith comes around on this one, but I don't know. I feel I even feel okay about Kyle Pitts potentially coming through here, but I don't feel great about it. Basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's totally fair. I also think Jonnu Smith kind of a fine.
yeah.
You could do worse than Jonnu Smith. But the
It's
Falcons
annoying.
suck, man.
They do, and I'm sorry for Falcons fans, but I'm definitely cheering for your team to lose just so we can get back to some normal usage
100%.
here.
That
And
the world has never been more united than watching Arthur Smith lose.
yeah,
And it's not like because I want to root against him. I love
yeah,
the Falcons. Like I think
yeah.
from a defensive perspective, like this is a great team. And if they weren't coached by Arthur Smith, I'd be rooting for their success. So it's a terrible sign when the country is united in their quest to get you fired because you suck at your job. Like that's never a good look. And that's what Arthur Smith is going through at this point.
It really is. Yeah. So that is the Atlanta Falcons in a nutshell here. How about on the Arizona Cardinals side of things? Kyler Murray is back this week. James Conner is back this week as well. So what are your kind of expectations, I guess, for this Arizona offense? Do you feel okay about putting in a Kyler Murray or James Conner into your lineup this week?
I think you can. Like I'm again not overly excited about the Atlanta Falcons, especially from a run perspective. I don't think this is a
Mm-hmm.
great matchup. You might be in a position where you need to start James Conner just out of sheer necessity. Um, but again, I'm gonna probably have him, at end of day ranked closer like RB3 territory based on the matchup, based on the fact that he is returning from this injury, and just with the projection that this might be a little bit of a split situation as he reacclimates following that injury. Kyler Murray, I think again you start him. This Atlanta Falcons pass attack has uh, or the Atlanta Falcons secondary given up a little bit more to the passing attack than they have the run. So I think that puts maybe the passing game a better spot. Um, Trey McBride, I think, a fine start,
Yeah.
like middle of the pack against opposing tight ends. The Falcons have been this year. Last year we saw a very nice target share for Zach Ertz, when you had Marquise Brown and you didn't have DeAndre Hopkins, which, as a reminder, DeAndre Hopkins is no longer there as he was the last time Kyler Murray played football. We saw a very heavy target share for the tight end position when DeAndre Hopkins wasn't in the mix. So might see a really nice target share for Trey McBride to bounce back after a really abysmal week 9.
Yeah, I like it. I like Trey McBride this week as well. And then like for deeper leagues, if you want somebody, Michael Wilson's kind of interesting to me. He's been far and away the team's top wide receiver against zone coverage this year. 75.5 receiving grade versus zone, is nearly 15 points higher than the next closest receiver on the team, which is Marquise Brown. He also leads the team's wide receivers in yards per route run with 2.17 and fantasy points per route run with 0.40 against zone coverage. So potential deep league play there. We'll see what his successes with Kyler Murray back under center as well. But I don't mind Michael Wilson this week against one of the more zone heavy defenses in the NFL.
Yep. That works.
All right, let's go to what do we got here? The Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm kind of looking forward to this one. So let's start with the Chargers side, where most things are pretty obvious for fantasy purposes with Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen. So I guess the question is, how much do we trust like a Quentin Johnston this week? And
No.
yeah, for me, I'm just not
No.
quite there, right? It's hard, right? He just hasn't been effective. I know it was against Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed last week, so that makes it harder. But this Lions defense is not bad. They're a good defense. So I think we can be fading Quentin Johnston this week as well in a tougher matchup. So outside of the obvious choices, is there anybody else really on this LA offense that's interesting?
No. I mean, I this should be a more productive offense than you feel like
Yeah.
it is. And, we see sort of this rotation at tight end too. Like if we could just get some consistency in terms of like Donald Parham versus Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett's came back from injury last. Like there are a lot of different variables in this offense that just seem to always keep it from matching its ceiling.
Mhm.
I don't think there's anybody earning a consistent enough target share outside of these guys here. Like you know who you're starting in this team, and I don't think you can get cute. I know Quentin Johnston, you were probably excited to see some of that volume finally, but
Mhm.
again, just he's not there yet, and I think that's okay. Like we've been very spoiled with rookie wide
Yeah.
receiver production. We just can't necessarily continue to expect that from Quentin Johnston at this point.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. And yeah, Gerald Everett, he's been good lately for fantasy purposes, but not somebody that you want to depend on because the usage has been a little bit inconsistent there for him as well. So let's look at the Detroit Lions instead. So good week for Jared Goff. Going against the Los Angeles Chargers, who are allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. He's really been good this year. There's no other way of saying it. He's got an 88.3 PFF grade, third among quarterbacks. He's thrown for at least 200 yards a game. He's been delivering with touchdowns as well. Amon-Ra St. Brown is in there. Obviously, we're trusting him, but Jared Goff, I don't know. I feel pretty decent about Jared Goff against the Chargers this week.
Jared Goff is my QB2 on the week, and I don't
Hey, there
know.
we go.
I might be getting crazy. It is a road game. So like we'll see if road Jared Goff comes out. But like to be fair, the Chargers have zero fan base at home. And then you also have the fact like this is basically a dome. Like, is it really as much of a road game as usual? Probably not. But
Yeah.
I mean, Jared Goff, I just think is in such a prime spot with this particular matchup. It's been so fruitful to opposing quarterbacks, lots of yardage to be gained. Just think that's an overall smash. And I think this should be a matchup that is conducive to plenty of scoring, right? And I think some of that's going to come from Jared Goff here. Any interest in taking a flyer on Jamison Williams, knowing that this has been such a fruitful matchup for especially the wide receiver position?
It's a good question. And I think, like you said, because of the matchup, in the same way that if I want to take a shot on like a Rashid Shaheed, I might want to take a shot on a Jamison Williams if you're looking for kind of that high upside play. It's just such a good, like you said, it's a great matchup to do it. And we haven't seen it yet from Jamison Williams, but if there was going to be, that big game, it could potentially be this week. I mean, Josh Reynolds hasn't really been amazing by any means so far this season. So I think I'm okay with it. I think I'm okay with maybe a Jamison Williams like deep league play here as a flyer.
It's a total dart throw, but
Yeah.
the Chargers, along the fourth most fantasy points to wide receivers this season, just under 200 receiving yards per game to the position this year. Like this has been, it's been a fine matchup. So I
Hmm.
think if you are in desperate need, you could probably do worse than Jamison Williams. The big play potential is there, and I also think that if this offensive line can hold up against Khalil Mack and company, which I think they should probably hold up a little bit better than the Jets did last week.
Oh God.
I think this could be a fine start.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Is it definitely deeper league play there because he's not playing a full time role or anything like that. But we would hope to see his role kind of increase here and coming out of a bye week too. So there's definitely some potential that that role does increase coming out of the bye for Jamison Williams. Obviously, we love Sam Laporta too, but David Montgomery is back this week as well, which could make things a little bit trickier for Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think you might start both of them, really, just given how good they've both been. How about you? Do you feel okay about starting both of these guys?
Yeah, and I think, you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, the explosive playability is 100% there. He might not require as many touches to get to that fantasy
Mm-hmm.
point production that maybe a David Montgomery would like. But I do think David Montgomery, of course, being back in the mix, presumably in line for some of that goal line work. If they get in that situation, the ceiling for Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, just a little bit lower than you've seen when he has the backfield to himself. But I still think it's really going to be hard to put that lightning back in the bottle for this
Yeah.
team overall. So yeah, I think you start both.
Yep. Definitely with you there. All right, Giants and Cowboys is next. Again, this should be a pretty straightforward one as well, Kate. So I'll start off by asking you what I imagine is going to be like the smallest list of players yet in this regard. But who are you trusting in your lineup on the New York Giants in Week 10?
Oh. I mean, you start Saquon Barkley,
Yeah, that's one.
and I don't even think you expect all that much. Like I think Saquon Barkley a pretty decent fade here in this matchup. Not putting a whole ton of stock in anybody. Like, not
Yeah.
only are they down their quarterback, they're starting this rookie who, at least he gets a full week of game prep, right? As the starting quarterback, Tommy DeVito. But what is this offense going to look like? I don't know, because they're also down their top receiving weapon in Darren Waller, and there's not really any other standouts here. Like, this is an opportunity for this defense to really hone in on Saquon Barkley as one of the only true threats on this entire offense. Maybe he gets a ton of volume that obviously I think you can't afford to sit him. And you never would, because it's Saquon Barkley. You can always break off one of those runs. Might get, some decent usage as a receiver, but I think you were tempering expectations massively that he's going to have any sort of efficient day against this defense, and B, against this defense who knows exactly what they're going to do. They're going to have to run the ball a lot with Saquon Barkley, just given their situation and their lack of weapons in the receiving game.
Yeah, I'm with you. We touched on it last week too, right? As far as tempering expectations for Saquon Barkley, even though it was a decent matchup on paper, but it's the offense in general there for the Giants that it makes it harder to trust them, and especially against a defense like Dallas, who can basically just focus on Saquon Barkley, like we said. So yeah, you're starting him, but he is pretty much the only one that I have any interest in for fantasy purposes on the Giants. So that makes that pretty quick. Let's move to the Dallas Cowboys here. And let's start with Tony Pollard, because I know he hasn't lived up to expectations so far this year. Heading into the year was Dallas's clear cut lead back. I had him in that top 5 running back range in the rankings. He hasn't delivered. He's been PPR RB17 on the season, but a matchup with the Giants could be just what he needs to kind of get back on track. Last time he played the Giants, which was week 1, he finished as the PPR RB5 for the week. So that was his best finish of the season, his lone top 10 PPR running back finish for the season as well. Hasn't had the rushing metrics or anything encouraging like that, just based purely on matchup. I feel pretty good about Tony Pollard this heading into this week to get back into that top 10 running back range for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, I think that, we might not get a 2 touchdown outing here from Tony Pollard, but I would not be surprised at all if this is the game where he snaps that streak of going without a score. And, he's, despite the lack of ceiling here, because of the lack of touchdowns, it's really hard to sit a guy who's, going to touch the ball 15 times a game, especially under these circumstances. Even I think you're encouraged by his usage as a receiver over the past few weeks, 5+ targets in 3 of the last 4 games. Again, hard to argue with that kind of usage, especially in a full PPR league, but this could be a very good spot for them to just continue to establish the run. This shouldn't be, a matchup that is forcing them into a ton of passing down situations. I think this could be one of those set it and forget it moments. And again, not many questions.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's really not like a lot of guys that you're really struggling with to start, right? You're starting CeeDee Lamb. I think you're starting Jake Ferguson as well, but that is pretty much it for Dallas for me. Anybody else that I missed?
No.
No. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, very easy. All right, let's go to another interesting game here, Washington and Seattle. And let's start things off with the Seahawks offense, which has been really disappointing so far, right? So Geno Smith, going into this matchup, the Commanders are giving up the second most points to quarterbacks, but Geno Smith, I think QB 13 on the year, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but outside the top 12, I believe. And then Look, the problem with Geno Smith this year is he's 19th right now in total passing yards. He was 8th last year when the season finished. He's tied for 20th in passing touchdowns. He was 4th in that regard last year when the year finished. 7 interceptions on the year, tied for eighth most. 13 turnover worthy plays, which is tied for the 7th most. And this was kind of the concern last year with him, right? So he did finish the year 2nd in total turnover worthy plays. He tied for 9th in total interceptions. So the turnover stuff was all there for him. We just had to hope that the offense stuff was and the positives were more stable for him, but hasn't really been the case so far this year. So Geno Smith and this Seattle passing offense, how are you feeling about this group here now heading into week 10?
I mean, I don't think you can feel super great based on production, but it should be the right matchup to get this passing attack going, right? Like this has to be the matchup. If this isn't the matchup, there isn't going to be a matchup that is really going to work out for this team this season. It's definitely been disappointing for Geno Smith. Just 2 finishes as a QB1 so far this season. Going up against the Commanders, though, this has been a defense that gives up, plenty of big plays, and again, you should be able to stretch this defense out a little bit across the field, especially with that many weapons. I wouldn't be surprised if this is DK Metcalf's first top 15 finish this year.
Okay. Yeah, he hasn't got there yet this year, right? Like
Which
you
is
said, which has been
insane.
really, really interesting. So yeah, it could be just because, like you said, the matchup is there. We know the talent is there for DK Metcalf. It's, 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers as well. Washington here, they're basically somebody that you can pick on, right? And I think if you're going to do that, you're going to do it with DK Metcalf, who can bully these corners for the Commanders and kind of take advantage of the matchup. So I feel fine about that call for sure. And then the backfield, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. We know Zach Charbonnet has outsnapped Kenneth Walker the past 2 weeks, more potentially to do with game script more than anything else. But I think again, feel pretty okay about Kenneth Walker this week as well, because the Commanders, their defensive line last week without Chase Young and Montez Sweat earned a 40.4 run defensive grade, which ranked the 3rd worst mark of the week. And that could be a sign of things to come for them. So you look at the Washington defensive line against the Seattle offensive line, which isn't like amazing, but they've at least earned a 67.0 run blocking grade on the year, which ranks as the 7th best mark. So potential for the Seahawks to kind of take advantage there in the trenches and get Kenneth Walker back on track after a couple of quieter weeks for him.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Looking at the snap counts, you might be a little bit nervous about Zach Charbonnet, but also like it hasn't translated to touches. So take it for what you will. I think this is a fine spot for Kenneth Walker. Still not trusting Zach Charbonnet at this point, but I think the rest of the offense kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah, and I mentioned Geno Smith's ranking on the year, and he's like QB 24 or something. So it was way worse than I had even thought. So he has not been good at all this season, which is surprising. So going on to the Washington Commanders now, and a quarterback who was not disappointed for fantasy. Sam Howell is the QB6 on the year, by the way. So how are we feeling about this Washington offense? I feel like Terry McLaurin, obviously, we're starting, but it's the other guys, Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel, who could potentially be out this week. He was dealing with the injury he missed last week, so we'll see what happens there. But the Washington offense, pretty interesting as far as just the amount of volume that these guys could take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a very pass-heavy team. You have Sam Howell leading the league in dropbacks. Tons of opportunity for the receivers. Now, Jahan Dotson, if you have Curtis Samuel out, I think he's still a fine play. They're starting Terry McLaurin. Now, the probably biggest question I have is Logan Thomas, especially in this week, knowing who's out, is Logan Thomas a viable asset? Knowing that like he's been a target in the red zone, like, can you go back to the well?
So, right, like it's probably on the low end range of outcomes as far as like tight end ones go, but I feel like, again, if they're missing receivers in this game due to injury, that Logan Thomas has been somebody that they've utilized here and there, so there's potential that for the touchdowns, and that's really what we're kind of hoping for our tight ends. And I think Logan Thomas, I think, is still startable this week, basically, is what I'm saying in most formats.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. 40 plus receiving yards in 5 of 8 games this year. He scored a touchdown in 3 of them. I think, for as volatile as the tight end position is, like, I'd at least like to take shots on, high volume passing offenses,
Mhm.
which that is what the Washington Commanders are. I also think it wrote up a little bit, not necessarily a ringing endorsement, but highlighted Antonio Gibson as a guy who's low key been getting a decent amount of volume, not as a rusher, but as a receiver.
Mhm.
In part on the back of that pass heavy offense. We've seen 5+ targets for Antonio Gibson in 3 of the last 4 weeks. You could do worse.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, Sam Howell too, doing a little bit of a better job at avoiding sacks over the last 2 weeks, right? He's had just 1 and 3 in each of the past 2 games, so season lows for him in that regard. So maybe getting a chance to dump off to Antonio Gibson a little more as he hopefully gets better at avoiding sacks. He still leads the league in total sacks taken, but improving in that regard at least.
Also, sorry, correction on my Antonio Gibson stat. 5+ targets over 3 of the last 5 weeks. So
Nice.
had two down weeks. But again, like for a running back in a full PPR format, you can do a little worse.
Yeah.
Like if you're in desperate needs, I don't think he's a high upside play. But again, if you need a guy that's probably going to get you like 8 to 10 points, I think Gibson's a fine play. But yeah, otherwise, I think the Washington Commanders, yeah, you start who you start.
Yep, I am with you there. All right, let's head to Sunday Night Football. And again, I am calling out the NFL schedule makers for
Yeah.
this one, because I can promise you I will not be waiting all day for Sunday night when it comes to the New York Jets in prime time once again to face off against the Las Vegas Raiders. Let's just get the Jets out of the way because the offense, it was tough to watch last week. But Brees Hall in a great matchup is pretty much the my favorite play for this offense here. I think top 5 potential play this week for sure. Going against the Raiders, who are giving up the 4th most points to the running back position. Don't have a lot of questions about him. So how you feeling about the rest of this Jets offense?
I think you start, Garrett Wilson. He's been a
Yeah.
fine volume play. It's Garrett Wilson, it's Brees Hall, and end.
That's
Period.
literally it. Yeah. It is not a lot of options there. We just cannot trust Zach Wilson. I might even take Aaron Rodgers on half an Achilles at this point, if it means that we could get some more
Poor
fantasy
Zach
production.
Wilson. He's,
Ah,
he's under duress from all angles. Like
yeah.
it's really tough sledding. But I do think, looking at even the box score from last week, like Brees Hall's day could have been so much bigger. It felt like every
No.
like nice chunk run got called back on some stupid penalty. Like I've got Brees Hall as my overall RB1 on the week. This is just such a delicious matchup for them.
Yep.
I don't really see any point of anybody but Brees Hall touching the ball this week.
Yeah.
End.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Just feed Brees and then we'll deal with the rest later. But
Mhm.
yeah, that is the New York Jets offense pretty much. Let's go to the resurgent Las Vegas Raiders on a 1-game winning streak under Aiden O'Connell at quarterback and Antonio Pierce at head coach here. So feel good about Josh Jacobs. Obviously, we don't have questions about him, but I guess the questions come with the wide receivers here, right? So Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers still not doing amazing numbers here with Aiden O'Connell under center. So I'm curious where you'd have these guys in your rankings this week.
Probably have both of them too high. I feel like at this point, Devontae Adams, for what your ceiling is, right? If you covered up his name and looked at his stats, you'd probably have him ranked as like wide receiver 32. for this week. Of course, you're not. It's just impossible to sit Davante Adams, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he has totaled 45 receiving yards over the last 2 weeks. He's just been so unproductive. The target volume's been there, so like again, you got to start him. I guess I'm struggling with this offense in its entirety because I do think that it's just kind of going to be a rotating door, and that's going to be about it.
Yeah, I hear you. It's hard, and it's a very tough matchup. Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed there at corner as well. We've seen these guys shut down wide receivers a lot this year. They're giving up the fewest amount of fantasy points to wide receivers per game on the season. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think Davante Adams probably in that lower range, a wide receiver too at this point, and then Jacoby Myers falls a little further than that as well. So we hope that the volume gets there for Davante Adams, and we know that he could be productive with it, but hasn't really shown it in recent weeks. And yeah, it's a difficult group to trust at this point for sure.
Disastrous group to trust. And like Jacoby Myers, even look at last week, had the touchdown. It was a rushing touchdown. So like, even though the fantasy points were technically there, it still just feels like a little too fluky for me to go back to the well on Jacoby Myers, especially against this defense that I want no part of really any of these assets. Like this is just a disaster on both sides of the ball for the most part. If we could just get the running backs to handle 100% of each team's touches, that might be a fine game to watch. Otherwise, I'm not so intrigued.
That would make for a way better Sunday Night Football matchup. It's just Breece Hall versus Josh Jacobs the entire game.
How fun.
Yeah. Anything more than Zach Wilson versus Aiden O'Connell, I think is the right way to go here. So yeah, that is our Sunday Night Football matchup. Let's head to the last game of the week here, the Buffalo Bills and the Denver Broncos on Monday Night Football. Anyone on Denver or Buffalo that you might want to highlight here to kick us off to start with this group?
I think Javonte Williams might be a worthy shout out here. So, they're coming off the bye, they're well rested. But we really saw the Denver Broncos offense just totally unleash Javonte Williams not last week, week 8, had 27 total rush attempts. It was the season high by far, was not efficient on them, averages 3.1 yards per carry, but it came against the Kansas City Chiefs, which we've highlighted them all season as one of these underrated defensive matchups that are just making things a little bit tougher for their opponents. Scored his first touchdown of the year. Just definitely want to highlight that usage because I don't see a ton of people thinking of Javonte Williams as like a must start when I'm looking at my start sit questions. And I think Javonte Williams must start at this point in the season. You're looking at this Buffalo defense. They've been banged up throughout the year, allowing the 15th most fantasy points to running backs. So like middle of the pack, but I think this is a great spot for some of that volume to continue, and he's well rested. I just think this is going to be a good spot for Javonte Williams, and it's going to be really hard to find a lot of, running backs that have that kind of upside in terms of carry volume.
Yeah, I was super encouraged by the usage of Javonte Williams heading into their bye to kind of ramp him up a little bit. And I think that continues going post bye as well, right? I think it was Nathan noted that it was like the third most snaps that he's ever played in his NFL career. So that was really nice stuff to see there for Javonte Williams. And yeah, like you said, wasn't necessarily efficient, but again, better matchups ahead for him. And as long as that usage is there, he's going to be locked into start most starting lineups at this point. Anything else on Denver? Because I got the wide receivers highlighted here for the Broncos, and Buffalo's been one of those defenses that plays like a average rate of man and zone coverages, but their weakness has definitely been in man coverage. The team's allowed 11.1 yards per coverage target and a 27.5% explosive play rate while in man, which are both the worst marks in the league. And then, yeah, Cortland Sutton, it feels like, has been the Broncos' most reliable fantasy wide receiver. And that's translated really against both man and zone coverage. He leads the team in fantasy points per route run against both coverages this season. And his strength against man coverage specifically, I think is kind of going to be the key here for him to have the best of the fantasy performances among this Denver wide receiver core, where I feel like Jerry Jeudy might be a tougher asset to trust this week. How are you feeling about Jeudy?
Definitely. Again, this is not anything that I would have expected myself to say earlier this season.
Yeah.
Definitely trusting Cortland Sutton, just even passing the eye test a bit more. Like Cortland Sutton has come up with some really, really sick plays this year, which has just gone totally under the radar. And that's helped Russell Wilson to this point as well. Like I think Russell Wilson probably been also a little bit better than we're giving them credit. I definitely lean Cortland Sutton at this point. Now, who do I think is actually the better real life wide receiver? I think it's probably Jeudy. But at this point, Sutton's been making better plays. He's shown a better connection with Russell Wilson. So going to the well there, I don't think we're really looking at many other assets, right? You're starting Javonte Williams.
Yeah.
I think you're starting Cortland Sutton. Any faith in Russell Wilson? I do think this could be a tough spot up against this Buffalo Bills defense.
Yeah, that was the one concern with me for the passing offenses, that the Buffalo has been really good against opposing quarterbacks for fantasy purposes. I think another note, I think it was from Nathan's Start Sit article, only 2 quarterbacks facing Buffalo have achieved top 10 fantasy finishes against the Bills, including Joe Burrow, who was this past week as well. So it might be a little bit tougher for Russell Wilson because he doesn't play at that Joe Burrow level of play, but yeah, probably like on the fringe of starting for me for Russell Wilson, really kind of like QB 12 to 15 range probably, and it's going to depend on my other starter options.
Yeah, I think that's fair. On Buffalo side of the ball, you're obviously starting Josh Allen.
Yeah.
I think the biggest question for me, like you're starting Josh Allen, you're starting Dalton Kincaid, you're starting Stephon Diggs. 2 questions that I think we have remaining for this Buffalo Bills offense. The first, can we trust the running backs in any sort of capacity? James Cook, again, just he looks great, right? But he's not getting the carry volume. I don't know if we're going to see maybe a Leonard Fournette sighting in this week. Like, what do we do with James Cook? Because, despite the fact that he's looked explosive, just not getting enough volume to sustain, any sort of viability from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, the volume has been the most frustrating thing, I think, for James Cook, around like 55% of rush attempts last week. So not ideal for him. I think I'm probably starting him in kind of that low end, like RB2 range, just because Denver is giving up the most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So I don't know if we see Leonard Fournette. It's definitely possible. It's a longer week for them coming in on Monday night, so that always makes it a little bit tricky, and it gives them some extra time to kind of work him in. It'll be his first
It should be a
game
good
playing.
matchup.
Yeah, it's a good matchup. I don't know how much Fournette's going to work in, so I think I still feel okay about starting James Cook, but like low expectations for him in starting lineups, and just kind of hoping that that Denver run defense continues to be as poor as it's been. Yeah. And sorry, what was the other one? The other question?
The other question, temperature check on Gabe Davis,
Okay,
who's
Davis,
done the disappearing act over and over again. It seems like the trend is that he plays well at home and he does not play well on the road. Does that just make him like an automatic, like, okay, he's home, we can start him? Or do you think there's more science to it?
It's a good question. There could be more science to it. So I did want to include him in the wide receiver man zone coverage report this week, just to try to look at it a little bit more. And it's interesting because Denver's been one of those league average teams as well, as far as both man and zone coverage deployment goes. And they've been worse in zone, and they've allowed 9.3 yards per coverage target and 7.80 yards per coverage snap while in zone coverage, which are the worst marks in the league. And they've also allowed a first down or touchdown on 42.4% of their zone coverage snaps, which is also the worst mark in the league. So Gabe Davis to his credit, has been more effective against zone coverage this year. Not like amazing by any means, as we know, 0.38 fantasy points per route runs, tied for 35th. But compare that to him facing man coverage, it's 0.19 fantasy points per route run, which is tied for 88th. So we do see maybe a little bit more of a pattern when he's facing zone coverages versus man coverages. And it's not like Denver's super zone heavy, but about league average in that regard. And they can be taken advantage of there. So could potentially be a bounce back spot for Gabe Davis in that kind of wide receiver 3 range.
Okay. I like it. And we know he's got upside. So I think those are my only questions on the Buffalo Bills. And I think the answer, like for me, if you have James Cook, I think you start him. Like,
yeah.
Again, I know the volume hasn't necessarily been there, but this Denver Broncos defense, it's been, a liability against the run at times this year. So I think there should be plenty of, room for some efficiency to make up for that lack of volume for James Cook. And yeah, that the rest of the Bills offense, I'm hoping is just going to eat in this one. I think this is a great spot for Dalton Kincaid. I think he's in for another top 5 performance this week up against the Denver Broncos, along the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this year. Like I think hopefully if the Buffalo Bills can't beat up on this Denver Broncos defense, we might have some big problems.
There's going to be a lot of questions if they can't do it. And we saw Denver beat Kansas City too. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities, right? So it'll be an interesting one to watch on Monday night, but I am with you for those fantasy picks as well. But yeah, that's going to wrap up our week 10 preview episode. Thank you all so much for listening and or watching on the YouTube. Hopefully that can help you guys get those lineups set for this week and come away with a W. Huge thanks to Kate as well for going through it all with me. Kate, crushed as always. Thank you very much. Please let everybody know what you have up on pff.com this week.
Yeah, breaking down week 9. I had the week 9 panic or antic report, the rushing report, breaking down everything that you need to know about some of the most confusing backfields in the league. And of course, on Fridays, as usual, I have your in case of emergency waiver wire pickups, just in case you're feeling spicy or need a little bit of maybe some risky upside in your lineups. Be sure to check that out, dropping Friday morning.
Nice. Looking forward to it. And yeah, I got the IDP fantasy report out now. IDP rankings are up on the site. We got the wide receiver man zone coverage report. That's up on the site as well. And the offensive line, defensive line matchups to target and avoid as well. So be sure to check all of that stuff out on pff.com. Enjoy Thursday night football tonight if you're into that kind of thing. If you're not, some other viewing options to consider. If you want to send a message to the NFL schedule makers, we got Detroit, Montreal, Atlantic Division matchup in the NHL. We need to bounce back win for the Wings. We got the Loki season finale, episode 2 of Invincible. Plenty of options there. Again, if we want to send a message to the NFL schedule makers at all. But otherwise, good luck in week 10. And until next time, peace out.